Tennessee basketball is eliminated from the Elite Eight for the second straight season. The Vols are going home after a 69-50 blowout loss to the Houston Cougars. Welcome to Off the Hook Sports, everybody. I am Caleb Calhoun, broadcasting outside of my backyard today, still live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio, brought to you by Banks & Jones. Play to win, T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. I'm going to give you a quick recap of the game. The Vols, as you know, as I'm sure you all witnessed, lost to Houston in Indianapolis, despite having a relatively strong home court advantage. If you actually saw who was in the game at Lucas Oil Stadium, a historically bad first half offense. I mean, I don't really think we need to go into too much detail talking about that, which I will though, but I don't think there's any insight required to know that that's what cost the Vols. Is they went 0 for 14 on their first 14 three-point attempts and finished the first half 1 of 15 with only 15 points, which was a record low for points scored in the first half of an Elite Eight game. It was an absolutely abysmal performance offensively. And then when the second half came around, they kept trying to make runs and fight their way back, but it was just too late and they couldn't get into their game because they started playing the clock. And given the way Houston plays, the way they methodically beat you, they weren't going to give up big runs, and even if they weren't going to go on big runs. So eventually, even though Tennessee at one point did cut it to 50-40 with under 6 minutes to go, Houston responded pretty quickly, had 3 threes within 90 seconds on their next 4 possessions. They had 3 threes, whereas Darlitso Dubar, who could have cut it to 9 points, missed a free throw. And at that point, the game was over. It was 50-40 with 5 minutes and 42 seconds left after Darlitso Dubar hit a free throw. He missed his second. Emmanuel Sharp then hits a 3. Jordan Gainey still keeps it close at 53-42 with 2 free throws of his own. So it's an 11-point game with 5 minutes to go, but then Emmanuel Sharp hits another 3. Zakai Ziegler misses one, and then Malik Wilson hits a 3. And before you know it, Houston is up 59-42, and that was ball game. But the real story is not the second half. It's the first half, where Tennessee shot 0 of 14 from 3, was abysmal everywhere on offense. They finished the game 5 of 29 from 3, so they actually weren't great in the second half from 3, but they were better as they went 4 of 14. But they were just horrendous in the first half. They were 1 of 15. If they hit, and the crazy part is they had open looks. But I'm not going to say it was just a bad luck, bad shooting night for Tennessee. And here's why. One, Houston wasn't terrible from 3. They were 9 of 25, but a lot of those threes came late. They were actually mediocre most of the game. Here's what I actually think happened, because Tennessee, the way Houston played had something to do with Tennessee struggling from 3. That, guys, we have to put that out there. Here's what happened. Houston runs that 3-2 perimeter zone under Kelvin Sampson. They mixed it in the first 10 minutes of the game. And it didn't matter, by the way, that for Houston, Juwan Roberts got into foul trouble and he had to go to the bench. That actually, I think, may have helped them, because Juwan Roberts in foul trouble allowed Houston to play a little bit more athletic around the perimeter. And truth be told, that took away more 3-point looks for Tennessee. And Houston kept coming off the screens. Tennessee, the way they play and the way they played all year is they rely coming off screens for the 3-point shooting to do well. And they need the spacing to work. They need Chaz Lanier open. They need Zakai Ziegler open. They need Chaz Lanier to come off a screen, and then Zakai to either drive or kick it out to find Lanier. And truth be told, the way Houston was coming around the screens and beating them with their athleticism, particularly with their 3-2 zone, Tennessee wasn't getting the looks they wanted to get. And on top of that, Houston is bigger underneath the basket than Tennessee. So Tennessee couldn't necessarily manufacture buckets in the paint. That combination really rattled Tennessee in the first 10 minutes. If you remember, they had 2 points in the first 5 minutes, 4 points in the first 9 minutes, and Houston had taken control. They didn't really get any good looks the first 10 minutes of the game. The second 10 minutes of the first half, they actually got a lot of great looks. I mean, a ton of really good looks. But they were already so rattled by how things had gone in the first half. I think that just messed with their psyche. And I think that had everything to do with them failing to step up and do what they needed to do in the second half. And as a result, in that process, they just started shooting poorly from 3 and couldn't get into a rhythm. I mean, part of this is, again, part of 3-point shooting is finding your rhythm. And Houston took them out of that rhythm with the way they defended the first 10 minutes of the game. That was crucial to how this played out, okay? Is the way Houston defended the first 10 minutes of the game really took Tennessee out of rhythm. Add in the fact that they have that size under the basket, and Tennessee really only has one true big that can play big under the basket in Felix Capera. And this is kind of how it works. Rory Conway, I'm going to go to the message board in a second, but I will address what you point out. Didn't you say you weren't worried about, he's calling me out. Didn't you say you weren't worried about Houston? Why did you think Tennessee could out Houston? Rory, you aren't wrong. I scouted Houston a lot. I thought Tennessee would play a little more athletic and turn up the pace, which I'm going to get to in a second. And that's why I always felt they thrived against teams that slowed a tempo down. I didn't think they would out Houston. I thought Tennessee would play at a fast pace and Houston wouldn't be able to keep up, because even though Tennessee plays outside of the top 300 in tempo, if they want to turn up the tempo, they are able to turn up the tempo, guys. And failing to turn up the tempo was a huge reason for them losing that game. And quite honestly, I think because of that, by the way, I'm outside with my dog. I'm going to show it to you guys real quick. This is my dog right here. That's who you guys see barking. Thought you guys would find that funny. But I thought Tennessee would turn up the tempo. And the reason they didn't turn up the tempo was I think that they weren't comfortable in their fast breaks because of Houston's length. I thought they would be. There were multiple 4-on-2s, 2-on-1s, and 3-on-2s that Tennessee had throughout the first half, and actually in the second half, where they pulled back and played offense ran their regular half-court offense. And I don't know if that's what Rick Barnes wanted them to do. I mean, because they did press at times in the second half. So, and Rick Barnes is not opposed to running tempo. But I really do think that I think they weren't comfortable trying to push the tempo on fast breaks. Zakai Ziegler had multiple times where he either made the wrong pass on a fast break, did that a couple of times. One of the most notable ones was they had a 3-on-2. Zakai Ziegler is going on the right side, Kay Phillips in the middle, Lanier's on the left, and there's two guys kind of between Phillips and Lanier, and Ziegler dumps it off to Lanier. To Phillips. And Phillips gets trapped going to the basket. I mean, that was just really poor execution on a fast break. So that's kind of one of the underrated parts of this game, is that Tennessee didn't handle the fast break. So I thought if they turned up the tempo, they would be able to really get something going. And the reason they were taken out of the game from a rhythm standpoint had everything to do with what Houston did throughout the first 10 minutes. But if they had actually played tempo, I think that it could have gone differently. Now, I want to talk about rebounding and on the boards. And you're right, guys. Tennessee got killed on the boards. It's not as significant as you might think. Houston out-rebounded Tennessee 42-35 and only 14-12 on offensive rebounds. But when you consider the fact that Tennessee from the field had 37 missed shots and Houston from the field had 37 missed shots, and actually Houston had 38 missed shots. So I take this back. Houston only missed one more shot from the field, but I would say that if you're going to miss a lot of shots, if your offense is going to be poor, sometimes you're going to struggle and lose the rebounding edge. I think the biggest reason I think the thing that stands out about Tennessee losing the rebounding edge, and this is what's so shocking about it, Houston playing that 3-2 zone, you would think that Tennessee would have a lot more chances at offensive rebounds. They should have dominated on the offensive glass, and they didn't. They lost the battle 14-12, and that was a huge, huge deal. Chad Morris jumps in. I bet the dog. That's pretty good. Chad Morris jumps in and says, the team that got beat by Vandy, Florida, Ole Miss, and Kentucky twice, that's the team that showed up today. And to be honest, they suck. It was embarrassing. Chad, we're going to talk a little bit about this, but let's be fair here. That Florida's in the Final Four. That was a road loss. The Ole Miss loss was on the road at the buzzer. Ole Miss is a Sweet 16 team. Losing to Kentucky on the road, there's no shame in it, and a lot of people lose to Vanderbilt on the road. Elijah Moore says, gave up way too many offensive boards, multiple threes off those boards. You are right. And, I mean, look, there's going to be a lot of criticism of Rick Barnes and choking in the big game. I'm going to write something on this. Guys, I'm just going to say this up front, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow with Dave. Back off. I'm dead serious about this with Rick Barnes, and here's why I say that. He's already the greatest coach in Tennessee basketball history. Not a close second, okay? Not only is he already the greatest coach in Tennessee basketball history, he got this team to the Elite Eight with a series of bad breaks. Now, let's think about this for a minute. Last year's team had arguably the best one-year solo act in school history in Dalton Connect. Gets bounced out in the Elite Eight. Loses a wave of transfers. Everybody's thinking they can't recreate Dalton Connect. What does he do? He goes and gets Chaz Lanier and Felix Akpera and Igor Milicic Jr. and Darlington Dubar. He also puts his eggs into Cameron Carr and JP Estrella developing. Well, let me ask you guys this question. What did you expect from him this year when the way he constructed his team ended up not working out for three reasons? One, JP Estrella went down with a season-ending injury. John Stone Dubar didn't work out for whatever reason, and Cameron Carr transferred mid-season. Barnes isn't responsible for Estrella's injury. That's not his fault. That just happens. That completely changed the tenor of the offense, and they couldn't play as big down low because Kay Phillips wasn't ready. Not only did Estrella getting hurt, but Cameron Carr transferring mid-season took away the way they wanted to play in certain ways and the type of spacing they wanted to do. So they were just severely limited the whole time. They had to completely change and restructure their offense and their schemes midway through the season. And they still got to the Elite Eight. They still won 30 games. They still spent 4 weeks at number 1. I don't know how much more you could have asked out of Barnes in this. It was a bad break. If JP Estrella doesn't get hurt and if Cameron Carr doesn't transfer midseason, I'm willing to bet this is a national championship caliber team. I really am. I don't think there is anything to be upset about with Rick Barnes and how things played out. The fact that he got them to the Elite Eight was an incredible coaching job. And again, Houston ran a 3-2 perimeter zone that took away Tennessee's open looks from 3 because they're so athletic. They had a post player get in foul trouble. And if you know anything about Tennessee basketball in the Elite Eight, sometimes players getting in foul trouble hurts them because then a matchup issue happens. That happened here. When Juwan Roberts got in foul trouble, Houston was able to get more aggressive defending the perimeter with their athletes, but they still had the size underneath the basket. And because they had the size, and because Tennessee only has one true big underneath the basket, and Felix Apera, they couldn't get the rebounding edge they needed against Houston's zone. It's one thing if you're missing the threes because of Houston's perimeter zone, but if you have the size, you can get the rebounds. I'm telling you, if JP Estrella is in this game, they're probably getting a couple more of those boards in the first 10 minutes. They're probably putting up a couple more shots, keeping this thing somewhat close. And then it's not in their head and they're not taking out a rhythm when they are getting the good looks in the second 10 minutes of the first half. That is a huge part of what happened here. And look, this team was somewhat limited because of things that happened personnel-wise that were completely out of Rick Barnes' control this year, guys. I'm honest on this. I'm dead serious to a certain degree. Back off with that. I think Rick Barnes really maximized what he could have done. Most college basketball teams that have 3 of their top 8 rotational players that lose 2 of their top 8 rotational players midway through the season are not going to win a national championship, even if they had a national title caliber team. When a third that was part of their plans just doesn't work out because of personal issues, which we have talked about, then I don't know how much more you can expect. Also, just a few other things for a minute. I mean, Jemai Meshack, lots of respect for him. He had 2 steals in this game, but Rick Barnes didn't make him miss 4 free throws. That's not Rick Barnes coaching. Okay? Things like this happen. Rick Barnes still has Tennessee in back-to-back Elite Eights. Never been done before in the history of the program. He took them to 3 straight Sweet 16s. Never been done before in the history of the program. Before Rick Barnes became head coach of Tennessee, they had a grand total of 1 Elite Eight appearance, 1 30-win season, and 1 week in their history ranked number 1. Tennessee in 2 separate seasons now has spent multiple weeks ranked number 1. In 2 separate seasons under Barnes has had 30-win seasons, and in 2 separate seasons has made the Elite Eight. And oh, by the way, they've also won the SEC regular season title and the SEC tournament title. They've literally done everything you could ask. So I think that the criticism of Barnes is completely unjustified. There were a lot. You're right, actually, Chad Morris. He missed 5 free throws. There were a lot of things that went wrong in this game. You can't put all of that on Rick Barnes. You can't. There were personnel issues that were facing this team all year. I was wrong. I bowed down. I thought Tennessee was a better matchup with Houston. In reality, if I'm going to criticize Barnes for one thing from this game, it's not turning up the tempo earlier. But I watched him press. I watched Tennessee trap. I watched them create a couple of fast breaks off missed shots. And then I watched them every time slow it down when they had numbers and play the half court or make the bad decision in the fast break. They had a 4-on-2 at one point and pulled back. I don't think that was Rick Barnes. I think that was the moment getting to the players to a certain degree, honestly. And so I think that when you take all of that into account, Rick Barnes, honestly, this one isn't on him. He was kind of coaching the whole season with one hand tied behind his back. And again, I'm eating crow. Tennessee was a poor matchup with Houston, but my matchup point was that Tennessee knows how to turn up the tempo against slow teams that are good. They did it against Texas A&M, by the way. So I thought they would be able to do that against Houston, and they just didn't. And I think that's the players more than it is on Barnes. With this, obviously, Houston finishes the year 34-4. They are in the Final Four as the number 1 seed. Tennessee finishes the year 30-8. I want to point out, too, that this Houston team has not really lost since I believe I can't remember the exact winning streak though, and I think it's 17 games now. But since getting fully healthy, Houston has one loss all year. Since getting fully healthy at full strength, their only loss is a 1-point loss in overtime to Texas Tech, another team who made the Elite Eight, by the way. That's their only loss. This is a very good team. I did like the matchup with Tennessee. I don't think they exploited their biggest advantages, but Kelvin Sampson got the biggest advantage coming out of the gate, and that messed up the rhythm for Tennessee the rest of the way. So, look, Rick Barnes, because of the injury to Estrella, because of Cameron Carr's midseason transfer, because of the personal issues that held Darling Stone Dubar back, was not able to get out of his team what he planned this year, did not have the personnel. So what he did get out of them, I think we have to give a lot more respect to. A 30-win season, 5 weeks at number 1, and an Elite Eight. This is absolutely ridiculous for anybody to question what to do with Rick Barnes. And I'm going to be very, very defensive of this. And I'm going to say it, who are you going to get? This game didn't work out in their favor. Okay, it happens. They lost 69-50. Houston had the better personnel advantages. By the way, I'm not even mentioning the fact that Igor Milicic Jr., who was meant to play in space, was not meant to play in a crowded paint as a stretch 4. Houston was a terrible matchup for that too. As I'm saying all this to you guys, I think you should realize that Tennessee getting to the Elite Eight was a huge accomplishment. Chaz Lanier was off from 3 in this game. Happens. Again, the lack of spacing and the lack of coming off screens and the lack of rhythm they were in proved to be very costly. He still had 17 points. Big shout out to Jordan Gainey, who was the best offensive player for Tennessee off the bench. He had 17 points. Also, he was 2 of 5, 6 of 12 from the field. And amidst all that, Tennessee fought back, guys, at times. They did make it a 10-point game before Houston just kind of got red hot from 3 in the last 4 minutes of the game. That kind of happens sometimes. Tennessee exerted a lot of energy coming back, but Tennessee did a lot of things right. And I really do think that they will be okay in the long run. I think that Rick Barnes isn't going anywhere. I think there is no shame in this loss. I know that the ever elusive Final Four has been rough for Vol fans, but trust me, they will get there. And I actually think they're more likely than not to get there under Rick Barnes sooner rather than later. I really firmly believe that. And I know that's a crazy thought, but there were a lot of factors that worked against this team all year, and they all kind of showed themselves today. And the first was the most notable was the fact that Tennessee was thrown out of rhythm. They didn't rebound like they should have against the 3-2 zone because of Houston's size. The wrong player got in foul trouble. And most notably, they seemed a little timid when running the fast breaks, which really stood out to me. So we'll have more on this later in the week. But again, once again, Tennessee eliminated from the NCAA tournament with a 69-50 Elite Eight loss to Houston. The show represented by Banks & Jones, T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com, broadcasting to you live from the Ted Russell Ford Lincoln studio. We will talk a lot more about this later in the week, but thanks for tuning in, guys. Please hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, turn the notifications on, and don't forget to read a lot of our content on Off the Hook Sports. We're going to have more coming out throughout the rest of the evening. Again, with Caleb Calhoun, this has been a special live recap of Off the Hook Sports.